I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Jeremiah, the 32nd chapter. Jeremiah 32. We're in the middle of the section of consolation, of encouragement, of hope that the people of God would be go from captivity back to Jerusalem. We're also dealing with the conflict of, for example, the first 5 verses of this chapter. Zedekiah is the king, and what good news does he have from Jeremiah? He's not going to be killed, but is he going to be taken captive? And we know from the Bible that his eyes and mouth will meet with the Chaldean king, Nebuchadnezzar. He did that. His eyes were put out after he saw his sons executed by Nebuchadnezzar's army and servants. And that was a very difficult time. Well, this hadn't happened yet. And Jeremiah is prophesying that you'll fall in the hands of the king of Babylon. You'll be taken captive. You will go to Babylon captivity, and you're going to die there, but it will not be by the sword. Now, he doesn't give him all the gory details that happens in between there. I think that's interesting, that Jeremiah just kind of paints the picture, but every one of these points that will be a negative. In fact, he says, Zedekiah, king of Judah, verse 3, had shut him up, saying, "Wherefore dost thou prophesy and say, Thus saith Jehovah, I'll give this city into the hand of the king of Babylon." Zedekiah, verse 4, "You'll not escape out of the hand of the Chaldeans, but be delivered in the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall speak to thee mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes. He shall bring Zedekiah to Babylon, and there shall it be until I visit him with death." None of that was good, but it came from the prophet Jeremiah. Now, I wonder if he said, "Zedekiah, you're going to survive all this, and Babylon is not going to take you. You're going to be strong in Jerusalem." You think he would lock him up in a prison? I don't think so. But that's the way the world works. And here he is, the king of the people of God, and yet he had not done righteously. And this is the what's coming upon him. And therefore, it's just interesting to me that if we have good news, well, that's a true prophet of God. There's a man of God. He's telling us the truth. Jeremiah's telling the truth too, and you want to hear it. So let's put him in prison. Shut the messenger up, because we don't like the message. In the midst of that prophesying, what does God tell Jeremiah to do and to say? What does he tell him to do? All right. And that was legitimate. Here was the land that belonged to the uncle, and here's the cousin saying, "Buy it from me," because he was of the same family. And in Leviticus, the 25th chapter, you could be involved in redeeming land so it doesn't go to somebody else if you could not take care of it or cannot pay for that. It was going to the heirs, and therefore there was a process taking place in which there would be a deed transferred. It goes to the family. It had a right to redeem that in the family, and that's what's happening here. And it's interesting to me to see how transactions were done. We've seen things with Ruth, and you spit in the boot or you do the shoe, and saying, well, you're not going to do your job as far as family is concerned in marriage. But here is that there was a deed written. Just one. Here's one transaction. But notice what he says, and this what Joel said is right. We even know where the land was. In verse 7, "Behold, Hanamel, the son of Shalom, thine uncle, shall come unto thee, saying, Buy thee my field that is in" where? That's the same city that Jeremiah lives in. It's about 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem. And while Jeremiah is prophesying with the King Zedekiah in Jerusalem, the house of God, he's been in there. That's where he lived. That's where I want you to buy that land. But that was near Jerusalem. And you're saying that King Babylon's going to come. He's going to burn the city. He's going to take all the areas of Judea he will conquer. And you're buying a land? You're buying land for the future? Yeah. And that's what God tells him to do. So Hananiah, my uncle's son, came to me in the court of the guard, according to the word of Jehovah, and said unto me, Buy my field, I pray thee, that is in Ananoth, which is in the land of Benjamin. For the right of inheritance is thine, and the redemption is thine. Buy it for thyself. Now, notice in verse 6, Jeremiah said, The word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Behold, Hananiah, the son of Shalom, thy uncle, shall come unto thee, saying, Buy thee my field that is Hananoth. So God had talked to Jeremiah, kind of like he talked to his servants that, he'll be looking for you in Joppa and so forth. He's telling him beforehand what's going to happen. So when it happens, what do you think Jeremiah thinks? Oh, this must be real. This is what God told me what would happen, and it happened exactly like he said so. That I knew that this was the word of Jehovah. He gave me confirmation. It's not that he doubted, but it was confirming that indeed this is true. But what does it mean? And the transactions that takes place here. So in verse 11, so I took the deed of the purchase, both that which was sealed. See, I told you there's more than one. They would take the copy and seal it, wrap it up and seal it, according to the law and custom. And that which was what? Here's a copy of my deed. You want to see it? I've got ownership, and we'll take it here if you have a problem with that. But what's always going to be secured? In the jars, that would be the original copy. Do we do that sort of thing today? Sometimes you have to have the original marriage license. No copy will work. But a lot of times, you can have a copy of your birth certificate. You can have those things for daily transactions, things that you need. But there will always be a backup, wouldn't it? Because this is going to be evidence that indeed this is permanent. So it's interesting to me that people don't make this up. This is just not storytelling. This was the custom of the day. Look it up in the Babylonian Chronicles, and you'll see such transactions taking place among the people of that day. And that's exactly what happens here. I delivered the deed of the purchase unto Baruch, the son of Neriah, the son of Mashiach, in the presence of Hananiah, my uncle's son, that's his cousin, as Joel says, in the presence of witnesses that subscribed the deed of the purchase before all the Jews that is set in the court of the guard. And I charged Baruch before him, saying, Thus said Jehovah of hosts, God of Israel, take these deeds, this deed of the purchase which I sealed, which is sealed, and this deed which is open, and put them in an earthen vessel, that they may continue. Hello. What was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Thousands of years later, in that type of climate. What have we found? Jars full of parchments, full of scrolls, didn't we? And they've been able to read them and translate them. And to where major portions of our Old Testament, there was a 1,000-year gap between any type of manuscripts, between the time in which the Old Testament was written until the time in which we have copies, people from translations. And so, where's the evidence of that? And what did they find? They found jars that have been broken, and a little shepherd boy finds those things. Years later, all of a sudden, we lessened that gap from 1,000, just a few less than 1,000, less than 500 years, but of knowing exactly, hey, this is exactly the copies that we have. It's translated, these were copies, and they are exactly what we have in our translations. God has a way of making those things happen and known, but there was a big gap as far as our Old Testament text, the Masoretic text that it had. But now we're getting closer to the time in which they're written, and all these were copies that had been made in the days close to before Christ, but a long way over a 1,000-year gap. So it less than that, about 200 or 300 years before Christ came, that the Old Testament scriptures were there. So this was just to preserve it. And why would that have to be preserved many days? They're going to be wiped out by the Chaldeans, and everything's going to be destroyed. No. It will be destroyed. The city will be besieged, and it will be, Zedekiah will come out in the 4th month of his 11th year. And notice we are in the 10th year, chapter 32 and verse 1. The besiegement already started in the 9th year. And it will be the 11th year and the 4th month in which Zedekiah, the walls will be penetrated, and Zedekiah tries to flee. In the 5th month of that same year, Jerusalem will be burnt by Nebuchadnezzar. The temple will be burnt to the ground, and the city walls destroyed. And what do we know from our Bible history? Do they come back to Jerusalem? What does Nehemiah do? He rebuilds the walls, does he not? And the people come back. And we're seeing here in this message of consolation that indeed those things are going to happen. And so we ask the question, what is the point? What is the point? It is to say, I will bring these people back. And there indeed will be blessings that come to you. Verse 15, for thus saith Jehovah of hosts, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards shall yet again be brought or be bought in what land? This land that's about to be desolate for a while. And that's exactly what would take place. So in this promise of God, it's an interesting way in which it is done. We're going to do some transactions that all people will do in their normal ways of life that have something sealed to prove this. Because what's the point? We're not going to be around. What's the point? And I could have one open for everybody to understand that land belongs to me. Why is that? Because you're going to come back and dwell in that. I think that becomes important, especially in our days. I think in the sermon tonight it will be brought to a lot about who is spiritual. Is there such a thing as spiritual Israel? Are we spiritual Israel? I'm going to preach a sermon on that tonight, Lord willing. But one of the reasons is that how they will interpret the passage I will use is the fact that Israel, the real Israel, the Jews, God has not fulfilled his promises to them concerning the land promise. And so you have different people talk about the millennial kingdom. We talk about the kingdom that is here now that God had designed to set up, and that's the one he designed for us, and we're part of that in the church. But they said, no, that has never been accomplished yet. I hope we'll be able to understand that indeed that's not true. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But let's talk about his prayer. Describe the character of God in his prayer. So we want to learn by the prayers of inspired men. How do they pray? How do they talk to God? How did they address him? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Or just destroyed by a big fish. There's no body left. That's true. And let's just say, all right, nothing's too hard for you. Does Jeremiah believe he's going to come back to this land? Or that the people will come back to this land and to enjoy the promise that he's made? Nothing too hard for you. Sarah, you believe you're going to have a child and your husband's very old and you're very past childbearing? You believe that? That's too hard for you. And there's the part of faith, and it's being expressed how he's addressing God. He knows nothing's too hard, but indeed, if I'm having doubts about buying this land, if he had that, I think he realized nothing's too hard for thee who shows loving kindness, not only to thousands, but he also recompenses the iniquity of the fathers in the bosom of their children after them. Doesn't mean you inherit the sins of your father, but there's consequences of what the fathers have done, and the children will bear the pain of a lot of those things. So he's the great and he's the mighty God. Jehovah is his name. How did Jesus teach the disciples to pray? How did he open the model prayer we sometimes call that? Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You're separated. This might give you some phrases to use that understands that. We say, well, he's holy, meaning sinless. Well, who else created the world? Who had the power to bring into existence out of nothing? God, your mighty hand, your mighty power. And there's just another way of setting God apart, and may his name be hallowed, not only always, but also at this time when we're praying. We want that to take place. I hope everybody knows the Creator and knows who has brought all things to being. So that's indeed how he expresses his the prayer that he sets forth. And so we deal with the question now, how do you know the land promise has been fulfilled? By way of looking at this prayer. What does he say? Let's begin. Well, verse 21, he's talking more about his actions, which David has rightly brought out, what he's done. Thou didst bring forth thy people Israel out of the land of Egypt with what? Signs and wonders. So when we see signs and wonders in the New Testament, we're talking about things that transcend natural law, maybe? Turn to water blood. All the signs he did in Egypt. There's miraculous signs. They cause wonderment, but they signified that there is a God behind this that you need to deal with, you need to submit to. And he brought them out with a strong hand, with outstretched arm, with great terror. And you gave them this land, which thou didst swear to their fathers, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, and they came in, and they haven't possessed it yet. What does your Bible say? They possessed it. Now, we didn't go to Joshua. We didn't go to other passages that indicate, indeed, they did possess it. They came in and occupied it. So to say they have not received the land promised today is to contradict the truth. And what it does, it helps people have an agenda that indeed the church would just put in place of the kingdom. They rejected the king. One day, all Israel will be saved. One day, the Jews, the Jewish people, will be all converted to the Lord, and it'll be in that millennial kingdom. And they deny that the church of the kingdom, other than the fact it's just a substitute until the real thing comes. That's man's imagination. And that's man's, how they've been brought in their thoughts to interpret the scriptures. I just want to make a note. This is just kind of something I would add to my verses of where Joshua makes it very clear that they possessed it, that the land that he promised. And the very fact, one of the pieces of evidence, they had 6 cities of refuge. What were the cities of refuge for? Refuge for who? The axe handle, I worked with a fella, and that came off and hit him in the head, and he's dead. Was that an accident? Yeah. Well, there's going to be family members after you, and you went to a city of refuge, and you had to stay there until that high priest had died. So you weren't going to be running in and out, but you were going to stay there, and justice would be done. Accidental death, you're not going to be put to death. Well, they established 3 cities of refuge on the west, the east and west on each side. But it wasn't 6 until you had possessed the land. Then you add the other 3. Well, they had 6. What does that mean? They had possessed and occupied the land. And we see the difficulties that they had. And as they fought to drive out the people, they didn't drive out everybody, and they became a thorn in their flesh, and all the things happened with them not serving God and so forth. But the land promise, God fulfilled that. And it just says here, did they possess it? If you possessed it, I think that part's fulfilled. And I just make a note of that. This will happen in your daily Bible reading, but if you're not reading your Bible, Old and New Testament, you'll miss this one. And I don't think I'm putting that much emphasis upon it that contradicts the dispensationalist party. It contradicts them, but I don't think I'm putting too much. They came in and possessed it. They came in the land and possessed it. What more are you going to have that the land promise will be fulfilled? You'll possess this land. And that's exactly what they did. But they have not been faithful to God. And he didn't say you're going to possess it forevermore without conditions of serving me. Now, the land promise was given them, but if they're going to remain in it, there was always that teaching that indeed you'll be losing that. And they did, but God's purpose in Christ had not been fulfilled. And one of the interesting things is you'll come back and you will dwell in this land again before Jesus comes. So that was part of God's plan. That's why he's going to bring them back. And to assure that, what does he tell Jeremiah to do? He said, there'll be somebody telling you to buy the land, and that's your cousin, and he would do that. And so we see how all that is working together. Let's get back to this prayer. Number 19, how does God's answer clear up Jeremiah's perplexing prayer? Let's see in verse 26 if we can understand the point of the question. Then came the word of Jehovah unto Jeremiah. Let me talk back to verse 25 just to nail the point. And thou hast said unto me, O Lord Jehovah, buy thee the field for money and call witnesses, whereas the city is given unto the hand of the Chaldeans. I'm going to give it to the Chaldeans, you're going to get it back. So it's not, well, he'll never take it, that's why we're going to dwell here. No, you're going to captivity. So all that is going to unfold. Then came the word of Jehovah to Jeremiah, saying, Behold, I am Jehovah, the God of all flesh. He created all things and all people. And what does God say about himself? It's what he prayed to him about. And he said, is there anything too hard for me? You know, it's always good to talk to God in prayer in the way he's described himself. It's pretty good. And this is very much to the context of the battle. No, we're not going into captivity. We're going to be a couple of years, and Jeconiah that's over there now will be coming back. You know, there's 3 deportations into captivity. Daniel stayed there the whole time, from his youth on. And we see that there was talk, well, they're over there now, but they won't be there long, and Jeconiah was still alive, and he's going to be taken care of by Nebuchadnezzar, eat at his table before it's all over. But he's coming back. And that's not going to happen. They're going into captivity. How long will they be there? We've seen that in Jeremiah. 70 years. 70 years is kind of taking in about 3 generations of people in it. So you got you and your children and their children. And you kind of deal with that time frame, you might not think you're ever going to come back. Your children, grandchildren may never seen Jerusalem yet. And sometimes God's promises are way out there, but they will come. And that's part of faith we need to have. in God. Anything too hard for me? That's the question. I think it's rhetorical. What would be our answer? No. I hope that's the case. Doesn't mean I'm demanding a miracle, but there's nothing too hard for you. Therefore, thus saith Jehovah, behold, I will give this city into the hand of the Chaldeans, and the hand of Nebuchadrezzar, which is another way of saying Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He shall take it, and the Chaldeans that fight against this city shall come in and set this what? Set this city on fire. I mean, they'll have a lot of zeal to serve me. No, they will burn it. It's real fire. And with the houses, and just what was so sad about this from a godly standpoint, upon those whose roofs they've offered incense, they come a sweet aroma to whom? Baal. And poured out drink offerings unto their gods to provoke me to anger. For the children of Israel and the children of Judah, we notice at the very beginning, we said, is this really the northern kingdom Israel and the southern kingdom Judah? Or is he just another way of saying all of God's people? Over and over again, he's speaking about Israel, the northern, well, that's been 100 years they've been in captivity. And they were dispersed, that's right. But they were dispersed around the regions of Jerusalem, Judea, and the northern kingdom. Josiah even comes in and does purifying work in the northern portion after they had been conquered by the Assyrian army. And sometimes we think, well, they just went out of existence. No, Israel. Those people that were now dispersed and had been dispersed for over 100 years. In the days of Josiah, he's come back to try to help them, but now we're into the days of Zedekiah. Of course, Jeremiah starts preaching and teaching in the days of Josiah. For the children of Israel and the children of Judah. So just say, well, he's talking about the two distinct families that comprise Israel. Not only did that which was evil in my sight from their youth, for the children of Israel have only provoked me to anger with the work of their hands, said Jehovah. For the city hath been to me a provocation of mine anger and of my wrath from the day they built it, even unto this day, that I shall remove it from my face. Because of all the evil of the children of Israel and the children of Judah, which they've done to provoke me to anger, they, their kings, their princes, their priests, their prophets, and the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He goes on to say they turned their back upon me. Is he provoked to anger? Well, God, you need to be long-suffering. Yeah. It's all right to be angry and don't sin. That's right. I'm bringing the consequences of your sin to you. Think about it. God, who is above all the heavens, and he sees that little smoke going up to Baal. And he created the people from creation. He created them as his people. And they're doing that on their rooftops. You know, if we put ourselves in the place of God, how insulting you are to me. There's nothing I won't do to you. We get it even. If we had the power to do so. That tells you how long-suffering God is. He's seen it from the very beginning. And when Elijah sits there, I think I'm the only one. I'm the only one serving God, and poor me. They got 7,000 that have you'll kind of bow their knee to Baal. You're not alone, Elijah. But there's always I want to be in that remnant. When the majority's going somewhere, if they're right, fine. But if they're not serving God the way he's revealed to us, I want to be in that remnant that is going to be blessed with God's total promises that take place. Because a lot of these things that God is having to deal with in planning for the coming of God, he is having to discipline his people. And this was not the final this is not the final judgment. This was discipline. I'm going to get your heart right. And how was the heart going to be made right? Discipline. We do that with our children. Get your heart right. And the pain of discipline will take place. Well, this is what God calls discipline. And we might think that's the end. But that's the way God does to wake us up. So he had every right to do those things. And we drop down to verse 44. Men shall buy fields for money. And I've gone past these other places, but they're interesting to set forth that what he will provide for them. But to our point, why the fields bought? Men shall buy fields for money and subscribe the deeds and seal them and call witnesses in the land of Benjamin, in the places about Jerusalem, which Ananoth was there, and in the cities of Judah, in the cities of the hill country, in the cities of the lowland, in the cities of the south, for I will cause their captivity to return, saith Jehovah, and they will possess it. They will possess it again. And when did that happen? Well, that's after Armageddon and the millennial kingdom is set up? No. What's Nehemiah doing? What's Ezra doing? Did they rebuild the temple? Did they rebuild the walls? Did they come in and be involved in doing their daily activities? Notice in verse 12. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, again there shall be in the place which is waste, without man and without beast. That's why they had to seed men and beasts in our earlier discussion last week, because they'll be gone. And all the cities thereof a habitation of shepherds, causing their flocks to lie down. The Lord is my shepherd. He maketh me to lie down. There's still waters. Sheep only lie down when there's peace. And there's peace. So they're going to be able to lie down. The cities of the hill country, the cities of the lowlands, cities of the south, land of Benjamin, places about Jerusalem, cities of Judah, shall the flocks again pass under the hands of him that numbereth them. So they're going to be doing their daily activities. There's 5, there's 10, there's 15. Thank you. Here's my money. Here's 20, 25. I'm counting all this. How many you got in your flock? I got 50 over here. And they go under the rod of the shepherd as they come in. Just daily activities. There's peace again. And that's the type of thing that he is setting forth there. So let's look at our last question. What blessings would be connected with God performing the good word he has promised? We've looked at some of these, but did you see one that stands out that may be far-reaching, maybe the time talking about Christ, in which the people would be blessed? Look at it with verse 14 with me, please. Behold, the days come, said Jehovah, and I'll perform that good word which I've spoken concerning the house of Judah and the house of Israel, the house of Judah. In those days and at that time will I cause a branch of righteousness to grow up unto David. He shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. It's not Solomon. Surely wasn't Zedekiah. Who was the king when they came back from Babylonian captivity? Got Ezra and Nehemiah leading the way and all those things. In those days shall Judah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name whereby he should be called Jehovah our righteousness. For thus saith Jehovah, David, it says, David shall never want a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel. Neither shall the priests, the Levites, want a man before him to offer burnt offerings and burn meal offerings, to do sacrifice continually. Branch coming out of David. King David will have lineage on the throne and never will cease. And he speaks about those who stood in the place of the people and offering sacrifices. Who kind of fulfilled all that for us? Christ. He did it for the Jews? Yeah, he did it for Gentiles too. He's the one they're looking forward to. And they had to come back and be in the land again before that would be a blessing in those days. And what lineage did Jesus come from? Yeah, and that was David. He was a seed of David. According to the flesh, Romans opens up his epistle. According to the flesh, he's a seed of David. But according to the Spirit, he's declared to be the Son of God with power. By what? The resurrection from the dead. And then he's established his church. I'm coming back again, not to get a remnant and wonder why on the plane all their clothes are sitting there, but they've been taken. No, don't be stuff like that. It's the end of time. Because the kingdom has already been established. And part of that was getting the people back to the land, rebuilding the temple, again preparing for the coming of Christ. And so in God's way of looking, he does not govern by time, but 536 they come in and rebuild things. 444, 445 they got the walls built up. And Malachi at the end, at 400 BC, there's a silence of 400 years until John the Baptist comes along and wakens people up to prepare for the kingdom that's coming. And that kingdom was what? Church. The spiritual kingdom that you and I are part of. But all these pieces were going to be there. And it's interesting to me, I don't have to jump into millennial down the road here to make it all work out and therefore interpret Israel as being the literal people that we see today. They had their land. They possessed it. And we see Israel in their land today, but not like the promise that he made to Abraham, some say. But I thought I'll offer that you look at all of those particular parts, it has been in place. And you and I come along and we can look back and spend a moment like this together and study that. Any questions? I know that's the end of our lesson. It'll be a good place to start for next week. Any questions that you might have or comments you'd like to make? Okay, thank you very much.